Welcome to the Never Too Early Fantasy Podcast, where it is never too early for fantasy football. My name is Jeff.
And I'm Alex.
Hey, Alex, how's it going today?
It's going well.
Yes, sir. And this is our inaugural episode, our pilot episode that we have worked really hard to get to this point. So this show will touch on football. We will cover the news, speculation, and everything else going on in the NFL with a fantasy slant. We'll be bringing episodes on a weekly basis going forward.
All right. So let's talk a little bit about ourselves and something that we learned from our fantasy experience. So I'm Alex, and I've been watching football for 25-ish years and playing fantasy sports for about 15, give or take. What I've learned through trial and error is projections are just that, projections. They're not predestined or guaranteed to happen. They're educated guesses if everything goes right. Try not to get overhyped or locked into any particular player. Try to be flexible and take the best value that you can. It's important to look at the cons as well as the pros for any player, whether you love them or hate them. I know we all have players that we are very desperate to go after in the upcoming season, and there's definitely players that burned us that we want to avoid. But if they fall to the right price, or if you wait patiently to strike at the right price and don't overreach, that's the best thing that you can do and bring value to your team. If winning is not your primary concern, then you can just draft only the players you want to, just watch and follow. Jeff, let's go on to you.
All right. So my name is Jeff, and I am a 30-plus year NFL follower, and I've been playing fantasy sports in some fashion for the last 25 years. Along the way, I have learned some best practices that I will share with the audience going forward. Some of those best practices are preparing for the next season as soon as the last one ends. That prevents myself from being swayed or influenced too much by the talking heads or ADP. Another lesson I've learned is to be very opinionated on topics. Always have a clear direction on how you feel about each player. And the last little bit I'll leave you with for now is follow your feelings, follow your instincts, and if something I say doesn't resonate with you about a player, go the opposite way. But at the very least, you will know exactly how you feel about that player going forward.
Perfect. Okay, so let's go into what you guys probably want to hear from us. Let's talk news around the league. You want to start us off with Derek Carr signing with New Orleans?
Yeah, I mean, we have been talking about this for a few weeks now. Where's Derek Carr going to go? The Raiders had to virtually force to cut him. And he took some meetings with the Saints, the Jets, and the Panthers. He even went up to the Combine last week to meet with teams and potentially get his team that he was going to sign with. He ended up choosing the New Orleans Saints, which is actually like a pretty big deal. He gets to go to a dome. He gets to go to a warm weather team. So he's not going to have too many outdoor cold games, which was actually one of the strikes against Derek Carr. And he gets to go play with Olave, and as of right now, Michael Thomas, and he'll get to play with Elvin Kamara, depending his suspension, which we do anticipate him being suspended sometime in the 2023 season. What are your feelings with Derek Carr? Do you feel like this is as good of a hire as I do?
Yeah, and I know that you and I talked about this previously, that New Orleans seemed like the most likely eventuality for Derek Carr, just because, like you've mentioned, it's a good place for him to play. It's in a dome. He doesn't have to worry about cold weather. But they were the only ones that we know of that were willing to trade actual draft compensation before the Raiders were forced to cut him. they really went full court press to try to sign him, and they do have a lot to offer. It's a fun city, and they have some really good weapons to play with. Hopefully, they're all there. They're all healthy and out of trouble. But the only other teams out there that could have competed for him was only roster talent wise. I don't think that they could have met all the other criteria that Carr was probably looking for. So, and I do think that he is a massive upgrade on the quarterbacks that they've had after Drew Brees. So it's a good fit for both of them. And I'm shocked that they have the cap space to pull this off.
So, looking at his contract, it was a 4-year, $150 million contract. His cap hit for this year is $7.2 million. So that's because his signing bonus was so high. I think he had $60 million guaranteed at signing. Basically, what this does is it keeps his cap number low, which that really helps them for this cap year, and also gives them a quarterback that can go out there and compete over the next couple of years, probably for a division title. I don't see another team in the NFC South that is a favorite or would even be close to considered a favorite. So I would have to say Derek Carr made the right call because he should be able to walk right in and win a division.
Yep, that and their GM is a wizard.
Keeps kicking the can down the road. I think they're still paying Drew Brees somewhere in there.
I'm sure that's where all his Jimmy John's money is. It's actually coming from the Saints.
Absolutely. So moving on to another veteran quarterback, there are rumors swirling around Aaron Rodgers and if he will follow in the footsteps of the previous Green Bay quarterback, Brett Favre, and if he'll follow him to the New York Jets. What do you think about that, Alex?
I think it's interesting that he's incidentally following in Brett Favre's footsteps, but I think it's mostly due to the Jets are the only team seemingly that are going after him. So I don't think either team has much of a choice because the Jets struck out on virtually every other quarterback right now, and they're the only ones willing to go fully in on Aaron Rodgers being 39, his massive contract. I don't know how much left he has in the tank, but it definitely looks like this is going to happen.
Yes. So we do know that the Jets want him. We do know that the Packers want a first-round pick in return for him. The only thing that we don't know at this juncture is if Aaron wants to go play for the New York Jets. Would he tell the Packers no, that he's not accepting a trade? Would he retire instead of going to the Jets? There's a lot of questions that still need to be answered around this, but it does seem like some momentum has picked up with Aaron Rodgers to the New York Jets. It also does seem like the Jets are very desperate, as you had just said, for Aaron Rodgers. And the reason why they're desperate is because they have missed out on other quarterbacks. They've missed out on Carr. They're probably going to miss out on Garoppolo, and they're not going to be able to get a high rookie quarterback this year at 12. They're going to have a very hard time moving up with other teams in that range, looking at quarterbacks as well. So basically, they sent their owner, GM, and head coach to California to meet with Aaron Rodgers to see if they could persuade him into joining the organization. So it'll be a very interesting couple of weeks with Aaron Rodgers and the Jets and the Packers. I do think that the Packers do want to move on to Jordan Love. So this is how they would move on to Jordan Love, is getting Aaron Rodgers off of their roster, off of their books eventually.
The real question is whether or not there's going to be a clause that he can't be traded back into the division. Have they learned from the Brett Favre fiasco to the Jets and then to the Vikings? That's a good question.
Yeah, I mean, we will see, and I don't know if those clauses are legal and can exist, but obviously the Jets operated in bad faith last time because they traded him right back to where he wanted to go the first time. So
Yep. All right. We have,
Where Green Bay didn't want to send him.
yep. Well, Geno Smith signed a very team-friendly deal with Seattle. Re-signed for 3 years and $25 million per year. Looks like, and looks eerily like a bridge quarterback kind of contract. What do you think about that?
So I completely agree with that. It does seem like so at signing 30 million are guaranteed. So basically that means that covers the first year plus an additional 5 million. So if they cut him next year, they would only have 5 million in dead cap. That tells me this is a 1-year contract, and then we'll see after this. But Gino obviously earned to be the 23 starter for the Seahawks, and he's gonna ball again with Metcalf and Lockett. Like, I don't see the offense changing that much from last year. I see it more of the same, and that is really good for the fantasy outputs of Geno, DK, Tyler Lockett, and even Kenneth Walker.
Yep. I really like it. I think it works for both teams. I can't see Geno outproducing what he did this past season, especially with any other team. And I certainly like to see some continuity with the Seattle offense going forward into this season, because you and I are both pretty high on some of those players in that offense. I think it's a good deal for everybody.
Yeah, I think it gives them continuity. If you would have asked me going into last season who I would have thought would have been the quarterback for the Seahawks, I would have said Drew Lock 10 times out of 10. And Drew Lock didn't even sniff the field last year. And Gino grabbed that job and didn't look back. Like, I thought they were absolutely insane in the beginning to give Gino even an opportunity or a shot at that starting gig.
I knew that Pete Carroll liked Geno a lot, and he was the number one backup to Russell Wilson, and he did have some spot play the previous season. So I didn't know whether it was coach speak that Geno is going to be the starter for now after they acquired Locke in the Russell Wilson trade. But I knew that they were going to start out with Geno. I had no idea that Geno was going to have a career year and that the Seahawks would sniff the playoffs after trading their former franchise quarterback. That was pretty shocking, and he absolutely earned a contract. I kind of thought it would be more based off of what other quarterbacks have gotten. And if we want to talk about Geno having a good contract, Daniel Jones and the Giants, what a mess of a situation, and somehow he got his money. Is this a smart move for the Giants, Jeff?
The Giants were backed into a corner with Daniel Jones and Saquon Barkley coming up in free agency. So what that means is that the team had to sign one to a long-term deal and then franchise tag the other. Once it became apparent that Barkley was not going to be the person that they were going to be able to sign, the focus and the effort switched to Daniel Jones. And what that did was, it allowed them to cross the finish line and sign that contract, that 4-year, $160 million contract with Daniel Jones, which is essentially a 2-year, $82 million contract. And then we'll see what happens after that. And then they allowed them to quickly tag Barkley before the franchise tag deadline had expired. So I think it was very smart by the Giants because it keeps the two pieces that actually worked in the offense last year around. And they were in jeopardy of losing one of them up until 4 o'clock on Tuesday. So they pulled it through at the deadline.
Ideally, most teams in that kind of situation would want to re-sign the quarterback to a long-term deal and franchise tag a running back. For the Giants, though, I feel like it's reversed because I don't trust Daniel Jones to put up another good season. To me, he has to prove it. Whereas Barkley, I think, is incredibly talented at running back. But he has had his health issues, which is a major concern for any player, let alone one playing at running back. So they were kind of in a bad situation with this offseason and making the playoffs. They had a low pick, so they weren't going to be able to replace a quarterback most likely. I think that they're going to virtually have the same team going into this next season. Whether or not that's a good thing, because they certainly could improve in multiple areas, and now they're not going to have the cap for it.
Right. I could see them acquiring a wide receiver somehow. I don't know where, whether it's like a T. Higgins or a DeAndre Hopkins or someone like that, and then asking them to restructure their deal to like where they have a lower cap hit for the year. Daniel Jones has been with the Giants now for 4 years, so he's entering year 5. He's in his mid-20s. He should be an ascending asset. So they're banking on last year not being his best year. Because if last year was his best year, I'm pretty sure they would have said walk and we're going to go in the draft and we're going to find your replacement, or we're going to find your replacement on the streets. That's kind of where I think where the Giants' thought process is with Daniel Jones. But as I was alluding to, signing Daniel Jones was completely huge because it allowed the New York Giants to put the non-exclusive franchise tag on Barkley. How do you feel about the non-exclusive tag versus the exclusive tag?
I think it probably saved them some money. I don't see anyone scrambling to lose 2 first-round picks on a running back. I don't think that it really hurts them to do it. That was probably their best move. I just can't stomach them having Daniel Jones locked in for probably at least 2 years on that contract. But at least it's only 2 years and they can ditch him. But talking about the non-exclusive tag, how do we feel about the Lamar Jackson situation and everything that entails? Do you want to start with this one?
There's a lot going on here. So the Baltimore Ravens and Lamar Jackson have been negotiating for the better part of 2 years now. They haven't been able to come up with a solution. So he played his 4 years on his rookie deal. He played his 5th year rookie option. And now they've put the non-exclusive franchise tag on him, which basically means that a team can sign him to an offer sheet and then one of 2 things happen. They would give 2 first-round picks back, or the Ravens can match that offer and keep Lamar Jackson. But there's a lot of bad blood here. They can't be in a good headspace after 2 years of negotiating and not really getting anywhere. Lamar has to feel like the Ravens really don't want him, and the Ravens have to feel like Lamar is a little bit of he's asking for too much, and like, does he really want to be a part of this team? So I'm not sure that either side trusts the other at this point. So this is very layered, because we also have teams coming out of the woodwork like the Commanders and the Falcons and the Panthers and even the Patriots today coming out saying that they're not going to put an offer sheet in for Lamar Jackson. It does seem a little bit crazy and a little bit wild to me that they won't even have discussions with him. Because let's pretend that they don't even know what Lamar's asking for, because they're not really allowed to know what Lamar's asking for, because Lamar doesn't have an agent. Lamar and Lamar's mom are handling his agent needs on his behalf. So it's really hard to reach out to someone to even figure out what Lamar's actual wants and needs and desires are for his next contract, because you'd be reaching out to the player directly or the player's mom directly, and that feels slightly like tampering. So I just feel like that amount of teams being out early seems to be a little bit crazy.
Like you said, they've been trying to negotiate a new deal for at least 2 years. He's been injured both of those 2 years. He's had that one MVP year in 2019. He shows a lot of promise athletically, but he's a run-first kind of quarterback. He only throws to his tight ends. He doesn't really throw to his wide receivers. He takes away from the running back, so it doesn't make sense to even invest in running backs. He plays in a style that is likely to get himself injured, and he has gotten injured the last 2 years. With this last postseason, We don't know whether he was still hurt or whether he didn't want to play because he didn't have a contract. We know that after the Deshaun Watson trade and that fully guaranteed massive contract, Lamar wanted the same kind of contract. Is Lamar a top 5 quarterback? Is he worth more money or the same money as that Deshaun Watson contract? I don't know. I don't think Deshaun Watson's worth that. I don't think he's the best player, but I think the Browns were under the gun to try to get a deal done and to try to bring a franchise caliber quarterback to their team because they're not that attractive of a team in the NFL. Lamar Jackson does not have an agent, like you've mentioned. His mom is basically handling that for him. So teams can't even negotiate with him. There's the issue with the fully guaranteed aspect that teams have to have that cash available and set aside. How many teams will have that kind of money just set aside? And if you want to build around him, all that money is gone. It's very difficult for any of these teams, let alone some of the teams that are poor or in debt, like Washington. That owner's in debt, potentially on his way out. You have the Raiders that owner is very poor. I don't see anyone else being able to kind of have that set aside. So the Ravens, I go back and forth between it's a poor decision on their part to only potentially get 2 first-round picks in compensation to they know that they can match anything that anyone's going to offer, and they highly doubt anyone's going to offer anything close to the Deshaun Watson deal. So I think Lamar Jackson is in a bad situation. And you can talk about all these teams coming out and saying, we're not going to go after him. Well, they're not allowed to even talk to him until March 15th. And why would they give their hand away and let other teams know they're going and start a scramble to try to get him? They want to have as low interest as possible, as well as bring his expectations down so he doesn't try to go fully guaranteed $250 million, $260 million, whatever it is that he wants, and they need to scale it back. Of course, we're going to find out on March 15th whether or not there is a real market for him or not, whether or not Lamar does actually want a fully guaranteed contract. We're going to find all of this out, and maybe it's just Twitter BS right now. We don't know. I don't feel comfortable going for 5 years fully guaranteed for Lamar personally. I would consider like 3-ish years, something similar to the length that Geno got, but I would be willing to go a higher dollar amount for Lamar. But he's that quarterback style, the scrambling quarterback that once his legs are gone, he's not going to be able to be a good pocket passer worth starting at that point. Everyone wants to have their own angles and poke holes at it, but it's very, very convoluted. That if there was something like collusion going on, that obviously would have to be looked into. But I think the market for Lamar as it stands with what he's supposedly asking for is just not there. He could play off this year on the franchise tag, assuming he eventually signs, or he risks going back to next year being able to be tagged again without a real consequence to the Ravens. It's going to be interesting this next week seeing what happens. And then if nothing happens on the 15th, then it's going to be circus going forward with Lamar.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things that could happen with Lamar. Obviously, teams could wait till after the draft, so they're only giving up 2024 and 2025 draft picks. So there is like another window that teams could be waiting for to close before they actually put in that offer sheet, and they can give up later picks, less valuable picks. So there's that aspect of it. The other aspect of it, as you were alluding to, is I've never seen a good old rushing quarterback. Like we always hear about good young rushing quarterbacks. I've never really seen a good old rushing quarterback. So they don't age well. They age out of the league kind of quickly, the rushing quarterbacks, especially if they don't have a second pitch, whether they can throw from the pocket or not. So switching gears, though, because Lamar might get 2 first-round picks for him. Switching gears now to a quarterback that has gotten 2 first-round picks for them, Matthew Stafford. The Rams, a couple of seasons ago, traded 2 first-round picks and Jared Goff to acquire Matthew Stafford, and they did win a Super Bowl with Matthew Stafford. And Stafford now, with conflicting reports, one report has the Rams would like to trade Stafford, and the other report says that Stafford is a pillar going forward. What does that look like for the Rams right now, and what does that look like for the Rams in a year or two? Do we think Stafford's going to be a quarterback that sticks around for a few more years, or do we think that Stafford is on his last legs of his NFL life?
So I think Stafford at this point, his arm and shoulder seem to be done. I don't think that he can be a full-time starter anymore. I don't think that they can win with Stafford anymore, which is crazy because they just traded for him and they just went to the Super Bowl not too long ago and won. I just think he's taken so much abuse, especially during his time at Detroit when they were very poor for several years. His body is just breaking down, and I don't think that they can get much for trading him either. So I'm sure they would like to trade him and move him, but they know that at this point his market's at an all-time low, and they would look bad trading him for maybe like a 4th-round pick or less. But you know how I feel about these kind of situations. They should just tear it all down and rebuild. I know that's a little crazy, seeing how they were successful for a stretch. I don't see any good news with this team. They're going to trade their corner. They're going to potentially trade Cup, which is crazy to me. So might as well break everything down. As far as Stafford, if he stays with the Rams, which he most likely will for this season, I think he'll start until he breaks down. If he's healthy, he'll eventually get hurt. I'm not having high of expectations. Am I off base?
No, I don't think that you're off base at all. He currently has quite a bit of time left on his contract. If they were to cut him or move on from him this season, it's $49 million in dead cap versus a $20 million cap hit. So they would be acquiring an additional $29 million just to get him off the roster. So I think what you were stating seems likely that the Rams will not move on from Stafford this year. Just dollars and cents wise, it'll cost them more to move on than to keep him on the roster. Next year, that reverses. So it does seem like they might have to keep him for a couple more years, to be honest. So, and then if the Rams move in a different direction than Stafford, like where does that put them at quarterback? Like, they're not going to get a high pick.
Are they going to re-sign Baker Mayfield? That's definitely an option.
Do you feel good about that?
I personally don't, but I don't see what other option they have at this point. They might be able to get a developmental guy, but how often do those guys work out? They might suck. Sorry, but they might stink the next couple seasons and maybe draft a quarterback with their 1st-round pick at that point. But this year, they're kind of in purgatory, in my opinion.
It'll be very interesting to see what the Rams do with the Niners kind of in a little bit of quarterback limbo. And Kyler out, and I know you're a big Geno fan, but it's still Geno Smith quarterbacking the Seahawks. Like, this is probably the Rams' best shot to win a division right now with so much in their favor, with so many questions on the other teams. So I could see the luster to going full bore into trying to win another title or another division title this year.
I just don't see them being able to beat out the 49ers anytime soon. I don't know whether this was a one-year wonder for Geno and Seattle's offense. We don't know if they're going to target a quarterback in this draft, which certainly is a possibility. So potentially they might already be out of it. I mean, they're kind of in the same situation as the Cardinals, in my opinion. They're kind of stuck in limbo, and maybe they can bounce back and recover. But they both, to me, seem like teams that at a minimum have to retool or potentially tear it down.
Yeah, absolutely. So moving on to other tagged players, there were three other offensive players that received the franchise tag. And the first is tight end Evan Ingram. We had surmised this last week that this was going to happen. It has happened, and I know you are a big fan of a 1-year deal for Evan Ingram because you feel like he gives his best football under a 1-year deal. Is that correct, Alex?
You are absolutely correct there. Evan Ingram is the type of player that when he's under a big contract, he gets too comfortable. And I think when he has to play for his bread, so to speak, he actually puts up big stats and he actually contributes. So that's the best situation from at least the Jaguars side. I think that's smart of them to do. He still gets paid very highly. I don't think he's going to be in the poorhouse. If he puts up another good year, even with someone like Calvin Ridley taking targets, then pay him. I would be okay with them paying him, but he needs to show he can do it 2 years in a row.
Completely agree, and I feel like with Ridley and Zay Jones and Christian Kirk, that offense with Trevor Lawrence could be a juggernaut in 23. They're all up and coming. They have ETN in the backfield. It's a team that could be ascending this year, and I think keeping Evan Ingram around is a big deal for a young quarterback like Trevor Lawrence. Probably a bigger deal for Lawrence than it is for Ingram to stick around. All right. Speaking of sticking around, it looks like Josh Jacobs will be sticking around for at least this year and potentially years into the future as they are still negotiating a long-term deal. But Josh Jacobs was franchise tagged by the Raiders, and it was the exclusive franchise tag. What do you feel like needs to happen for Josh Jacobs to repeat his performance in 2022? And is there a quarterback that you could see playing with Josh Jacobs that would make you confident that he could do that?
I think he needs to have offensive line help and at least an average or above average quarterback play. That division's very tough with the Chiefs and the Chargers and maybe the Broncos being good next year. It's going to be tough for them to be competitive. I don't think he can repeat last year's stats, but I think he can still compete at a high level. Maybe 85, 90% of those stats. That makes sense to me. I think them tagging him is very smart because it's relatively affordable for them. They don't have to commit to a long-term contract. They can potentially do it again next year, and they don't let him go away somewhere else. I think it's smart business on their side.
So I feel like he's going to have a really good year this upcoming year. I don't think it's going to be the same as RB3, but I do think he is an RB1 going into this year. And that is a pretty big shift up. But I think he's earned it because it seems like he is someone that's going to get a ton of carries in a game. He's a guy that can catch the football. And I think a lot of it depends on who he's going to be standing next to or behind in the backfield. And there's some decent quarterbacks out there. They're going to be tied to Jimmy Garoppolo. Who knows? They might be tied to like Tyler Heineke. They were tied to Tom Brady earlier in the offseason. There's not like a world beater quarterback out there that they could sign where you would feel comfortable. So they probably will go the draft route to find that quarterback of the future because they are in such a death row of a division with Herbert and Mahomes, at least for the next decade, probably ruling that division.
Let's roll on over to Tony Pollard getting the franchise tag with that Cowboys team. How do you think that works out with them owing so much money to Zeke and with the head coach Mike McCarthy's comments stating that they just want to run the ball and letting someone like Dalton Schultz walk away? And after a year after trading Amari Cooper, So they're obviously going away from the passing game at least a little bit, if not a lot, and trying to rely on Zeke, who seems to be broken down, and actually Pollard coming off an injury, committing $10 million to him. How do you feel about this franchise tag?
So I think it makes sense on a lot of fronts. The only thing shocking was that they couldn't come to a deal ahead of time. I don't know if Pollard was as well sought out as the Dallas Cowboys believe, but they do have their guy. They do have their second guy under contract, and this will allow them to run the football more going into this next year. Did you know in 2022 that the Cowboys had the second most rushing touchdowns behind Philadelphia? They almost had 2,300 rushing yards, which is actually really high in the league already. So they were already leaning run a lot more than pass even this year. So I think that trend that Mike McCarthy had mentioned 2 weeks ago was something that was already being slightly implemented in Dallas. So I don't know why McCarthy had to go on record to say it now, but it does seem that the offense was leaning more towards the run than the pass in Dallas, because Dallas only had 28 passing touchdowns in 2022 and they had 24 rushing touchdowns, so they were very like 50-50, which doesn't happen in this league very often anymore. So I think bringing Pollard back, running it back one more time, their offense definitely wasn't the issue, or at least their running backs weren't the issue. And if they can pay the same money for Zeke and Pollard that they paid last year, then it's a wash. And they'll just kind of need to improve at the receiving position, and hopefully that improves with Gallup getting a little bit healthier and some of their young guys getting a little bit more experience, like Noah Brown and Tolbert, their rookie, that didn't see very much playing time. What are your thoughts on what Dallas is going to look like in 23 and beyond, and whether or not Pollard's in their plans longer than just this year?
Well, I think Pollard's the better running back between him and Zeke. And I definitely think that in this situation, it seems to me that the coaching staff doesn't believe in Dak Prescott because they're trying to shift more towards the run game and limit some of the mistakes that Dak makes. I think as far as what I prefer in an offense, I definitely prefer a more electric passing game with a complementary running game. They're going back to a more traditional, old school ground and pound. With you only bring out the passing game when you need it. So it's not going to be very exciting. They want to rest the defense, which is concerning language to me. It's going to be lower scoring, in my opinion. It's going to be tougher games. They're going to feel dragged out as a fan. I'm going to stay away from them in general for fantasy purposes, but maybe go after Dallas's defense. I don't know. So I'm not particularly thrilled about the situation. I'm not a big McCarthy fan either. This is going to be a moment where this season is going to prove whether or not McCarthy is a good coach, in my opinion. Because if you don't have Dalton Schultz, you don't have a really good coordinator in Kellen Moore. And if you bring up this kind of system that has a team like the Eagles in it, potentially a Washington team that could improve, potentially a Giants team that's either the same or maybe they can improve at wide receiver. I don't know. It's possible for them to make the playoffs. I'm just not thrilled about the offense.
Yeah, I absolutely agree that it's possible for them to make the playoffs. So I know we've had the discussion before, but McCarthy and Sean Payton have very similar stats and very similar coaching records and very similar playoff records. I think this year is going to be a great year to see who might be the better coach. They've been both coaching the same amount of years, and they've Their parallels of their career is so eerie, and one is talked about in such a highlight, and one is talked about as just Mike McCarthy. So I think that just watching this upcoming year could be the thing that actually makes Mike McCarthy a good NFL football coach, hopefully in more people's minds, and we will see.
I think that's a interesting take, and I know you and I have talked about that before. It's going to be interesting with Mike McCarthy having the offense that he thinks that he wants, and Sean Payton taking over the Broncos. Can he rebuild the Broncos like he rebuilt the Saints? Can he make them as electric and successful? We're going to be having our weekly McCarthy versus Sean Payton updates during the regular season to see where they're at, our little progress markers there.
We are. And just quickly looking at a few other moves that have happened or are going to happen in the next week. The Jets have cut Braxton Berrios, which he was a pretty good slot receiver for them. So someone should gobble him up at some point in the near future. I don't think he's going to be like the wide receiver that breaks barriers this year or anything like that, but he's going to be a nice solid piece that a playoff team or a team that needs wide receiver help will actually like help across the middle, and he's a little bit of a gadget player as well, so he can throw the football, he can run the football. He's kind of a fun football player to watch overall. Do you see Braxton going anywhere of note, or do you think he's just another guy just kind of out there and hopefully someone picks up the wide receiver and takes a look at him?
He's another role player kind of wide receiver, in my opinion, that a team's going to take a look at, bring in as a wide receiver 3 or 4. I think he's part of this growing list of uninspiring wide receiver free agents, but he's young enough that he could potentially build a career somewhere as a slot guy. I'm not super excited about him. I know that there's another wide receiver that's expected to be cut that's a little higher profile, but maybe on the decline, and that is Adam Thielen with the Vikings. So I don't know if he's going to eventually have a contract renegotiation. I don't know if he's going to be cut, but to me, I think he would immediately rise to the top of the list of free agent wide receivers. I think he still has a little bit left in the tank, and I am much more excited about him than a Juju Smith-Schuster. Do you think Adam Thielen is going to be cut? And if you do you think he goes anywhere interesting? Do you think he still has anything left?
So I think that he's going to be 33 before the season starts this year, which does seem ancient for a wide receiver. But the type of wide receiver that he is, I don't think age is going to be something that slows him down as quick as other wide receivers. So that will be something working in his favor. I don't know where I see him ending up. Somewhere in my gut tells me that he's going to take a pay cut to stay with the Vikings, but that's only because when I think of Thielen and the Vikings, they're very synonymous with one another, and I don't know if I could picture Adam Thielen in another jersey. And if I could picture him in another jersey, it's probably going to be like the Kansas City Chiefs. He's going to go to a team where he can win a title, because I don't see him just sticking around to stick around. Like, he's not going to stick around and go play for the Bears next year, or he's not going to play for a non-contender for a title. He's going to try to win a championship on his way out. I can't see him sticking around just make a few more bucks and rack up a few more catches. Does that assessment sound about right?
I think you're correct there. So if I understand you 100% correct, you're saying that you have a Thielen that he's going to stay with the Vikings?
I've got a Thielen, yes.
Yeah, you literally almost rolled your eyes to death over there. I could tell. So, I mean, we could talk about the combine briefly. I know we're going to have future episodes where we go more in depth in the prospects. Highest risers to me when it comes to fantasy, quarterback wise, has got to be Anthony Richardson. He shot up from fourth or fifth quarterback to potentially being the first quarterback or first overall pick in the real NFL draft just because he looked phenomenal out there and tested well on every single drill, looked like the most athletic quarterback that they've ever had in the combine since they started doing it. He's even more athletic than Cam Newton. He looks like he has the arm of Josh Allen. Like everything that he did was very impressive. And I know that some of the other quarterbacks looked well also. So Levis, who I've personally had concerns about, he went out there and I thought he did fairly well and I softened my stance on him. I'm a little disappointed that Bryce Young didn't do any drills and he measured even shorter than we suspected. When he said he was 6 foot, a lot of us suspected he's probably 5'11". Turns out he's 5'10", which is kind of really bad sign to have in the NFL when your offensive linemen are all 6'4", 6'5", and defensive linemen can be 6'7", 6'9". They're going to be batting passes down. You're going to have a hard time seeing. It's not the same as college. It's much faster and quicker. I am very concerned about it. I think he's very similar in some regards to Baker Mayfield. He's just a little bit cleaner on the personality. I think that potentially Bryce could fall out of the first overall pick, might not be the first quarterback taken. I think Anthony Richardson, I think CJ Stroud, and I think Levis have all improved their stock. Wide receiver-wise, I don't think anyone lit up the board, which was very disappointing. Some of them ran 40 times and some of them were fast, but a lot of them were on par with each other or pretty close. They didn't do that many drills. So I still don't have that clear of a picture on wide receivers this year. And running backs, I think the top three just cemented themselves. I don't think the other ones stood out that much. It's going to be kind of a mess this year to pinpoint them. Jeff, I don't know, did you follow any of the combine or any of the combine news?
Yeah, I followed a little bit of the combine news. I did see that one offensive lineman tore his ACL in the middle of the combine, which is unfortunate. I feel like having linemen run 40s is not, we have better things to do with our time than to watch that. Who are your top three backs going into this year's fantasy drafts for rookies?
I have Bijan Robinson still as my number one. But it's very close to Jahmyr Gibbs. I like both of those backs a lot. I kind of think Jahmyr Gibbs is the sneakier, better back. He's a year younger. I think he's a little bit faster. He's a better receiving back, although Bijan does have the capability to receive. It's not primarily what he did at Texas. The third back, in my opinion, where I'm at right now, is Zach Charbonnet from UCLA. I think he did very well at the combine. So I think he cemented himself in the number three. I'm still working out who I like at 4 and 5. So I'm not sure where I'm going to end up with, but I'm going to continue my own evals and see who else can fill that out and see if we can make our own rookie ranking board before we start doing rookie draft season.
Yeah, we have Devon Achane as well, and he was someone that actually ran a pretty good 40 time, and I got him as my number 4 back. But yeah, we'll discuss rookie backs as we go a little bit further. I think those are probably the top 4 rookie running backs going into this year. Receivers, I agree with you, completely up in the air. And quarterbacks look a lot like the Baker Mayfield, Sam Darnold, Josh Allen draft, where there might be one of those guys for each one of those the quarterbacks from that draft. Like Bryce Young might turn out to be Baker, and Anthony Richardson might turn out to be Josh Allen, like the equivalent of them.
Yeah. It's going to be interesting. I'm very excited for the draft to see where everybody goes. And I'm excited to see, what these guys can do in their careers.
Absolutely.
Go
Me too. Enter some new blood.
and know that next, we have March 15th, the NFL free agency official start. So we will see, if there's Lamar Jackson news. We'll see if there's any movement from free agents that we haven't seen anything concrete yet. We'll see if anyone gets released that's been rumored to be released. Anyone gets traded. It's going to be fun. That's your Christmas, Jeff.
It is, and we should make clear that the legal tampering period starts on March 13th, which means that deals will start to leak out in the next 4 days or so. And you can expect very early on deals for like Jimmy Garoppolo. I expect him to sign very early into free agency. I don't expect him to hang on for too long. You probably could see Baker even sign. He might even go back to the Rams at this point on a 1-year deal or something like that. But yeah, we're going to see a whole bunch of deals for players on that first couple of days. And even before then, with that legal tampering period, and beat reporters will start to announce them relatively quickly. Can expect like a Juju Smith-Schuster and like Jacoby Myers to sign pretty early, probably Dalton Schultz, and maybe another tight end like Gesicki to sign pretty early. Maybe even Foster Moreau could sign early, because that's a guy that I'm looking at to see where he signs, and potentially he could be a good tight end to go after in fantasy drafts. We know that he did a good job of backing up Waller for all those years. But free agency is upon us. It is Christmas, and I know that I'm going to be sitting here feverishly updating all of my spreadsheets and just trying to make sure that I have the most accurate and up-to-the-minute data on this spreadsheet.
All right. Well, I can't wait to tear apart your spreadsheets and tell you how wrong you are with every pick. But let's go ahead and get started with some of these free agents that we're waiting to hear news on. Should we start with Lamar Jackson that we've already covered a little bit? But let's talk about best landing spots for these free agents. So Lamar Jackson, what is his best landing spot for fantasy?
So Lamar's best landing spot at this point is going to be Atlanta. They have a couple of young wide receivers. They have a young wide receiver and a young tight end that acts like a wide receiver in Drake London and Kyle Pitts. The interesting slant to this is that Atlanta picked so high this year that they're better off waiting until after the draft's over with to put in the offer sheet. And that way they have to only put up a 24 and a 25 draft pick. Where could you see Lamar going as a potential good landing spot for him?
I think everyone, all the media, all the fans, I think some of the spots that people really want him to go to is, like you said, Atlanta for the Michael Vick kind of connection to kind of bring back the Vick days. I think there's a lot of Panthers fans. I know that you've got your Panthers hoodie on. A lot of Panthers fans want to bring back the good Cam Newton years, and he would be very reminiscent to that. I think both of those would be decent spots. I think going back to the Ravens, if they can come to an agreement and put their personal feelings aside, or really have a kumbaya moment and just work their issues out, maybe the Ravens, he can stay there. I think those, to me, are the three best spots for him personally. But he could go to any team, really, that needs a quarterback. I think the Commanders would have been a really good spot for him. He wouldn't even have to move. But I don't think that owner can afford it. So I don't think that that's going to happen. But I think a sleeper team that he could go to is the Titans. That doesn't seem like a sexy pick right now, but they're a team that's about to have like $150 million in cap space next year. They have Treylon Burks, who's young. They have Derrick Henry right now. They have a team that has a pretty decent defense. They just need to be kind of retooled. And it's a team that the AFC South is winnable. Even with the Jaguars being good, any team can win the AFC South. So that's another team to keep on the mind. He could go anywhere at this
Don't
point
forget
that
about the
doesn't
New
have a
York
quarterback.
Jets.
That's right, the New York Jets. But I'm very convinced that they're all in on Aaron Rodgers, and Aaron Rodgers doesn't have anywhere else to go. So we'll see.
I mean, he could stick it to Green Bay.
That's true. We have another person to talk about. One of your favorite running backs that we like to disagree on, Leonard Fournette. Buccaneers are letting him walk. Where do you think his best fit is?
Fournette signed a three-year, $27 million deal last year, and we can see how quickly these deals can get ripped up and thrown away. So I think a really good spot for him is staying within the division. And I could see him going to New Orleans, especially now with Derek Carr there. And with Kamara potentially being suspended for 6 games, I could see Fournette going in there, sliding right into that role for the first 6 weeks, and then going into more of a 50-50 split with Kamara down the stretch. And I think that would keep both guys fresh and healthy and good for a stretch playoff run. Could you see him fitting in New Orleans?
I think New Orleans is probably the best bet. He went to college at LSU, so he's got that LSU connection. As much as I like to critique his skill level at this point, or his talent level, his what he's got left in the tank, he's got more than Mark Ingram. So I could easily see him going to New Orleans for sure. And really any team that needs a complimentary, capable veteran back, I think he'd fit just about any team as well. I could even see him going back to New England at some point, but I think the Saints are really the golden spot for him.
I completely agree with that, and I could see that happening relatively quickly here in free agency, because I don't think Leonard Fournette is done playing football, especially if he was playing hurt last year and he was still pretty productive some weeks.
Yeah.
So moving on, as you had mentioned, the New England Patriots, Jacoby Myers is a free agent. Where could you see Jacoby landing, and what's a good spot for him?
I think ultimately he'll most likely re-sign with the Patriots, but any team that needs a really good possession wide receiver is going to jump at him. I could even see him going to like the Chiefs, where I think he would potentially be an upgrade on Juju Smith-Schuster. I think that would be the most ideal in my opinion. Is there any particular place where you think he'd be best going to?
So we're going to talk about Myers here, and then we're going to talk about Juju right after this. But I could really see the Giants trying to scoop both of them. One of them, they've got to start doing something to that receiving core to help out Daniel Jones. And hopefully it won't cost an arm and a leg. And if it does, they might as well just trade for T. Higgins and re-sign T. Higgins. Also, if Rodgers stays in Green Bay, they're going to be looking for a veteran wide receiver, because we know that Rodgers likes to throw to his veteran wide receivers, and he would not want to throw to Watson and Dobbs there. So they would have to bring in some veteran wide receivers, whether it's like a Sterling Shepard or Jacoby Myers here. And Jacoby Myers would be someone that you could see be his new possession receiver across the middle, like his new Randall Cobb. But those would be some of the places that I would see him go, probably either following Rodgers or going to help Daniel Jones at this point.
We both know the Giants could use all the help they can get at wide receiver. I'm just salivating over the thought of Jacoby Myers being a possession complement to Darius Toney at Kansas City, as well as being another option behind Travis Kelce for Patrick Mahomes. I just think that is the most ideal fit. I could easily see, though, Juju Smith-Schuster going to the Giants just because they desperately need help. But also, the Bears desperately need a little bit of a bigger wide receiver than Mooney provides. So that would be a good fit. They certainly have the money for it. So those are two really good spots for him. Not really sure any other team is desperate to call Juju at this point, though, even though he did have a decent season with 900 yards receiving.
Yeah, so you'd be reuniting Claypool and Juju, former Steeler receivers in Chicago. Also, the Falcons need some wide receiver help as well because pretty much behind the depth chart is just Drake London and nobody else behind him.
They have Pitts. They have Kyle
So
Pitts.
I got him in the tight end slot right now. I know he acts as a wide receiver, but
Well, as far as
man,
their actual offense, yeah. As far as their actual offense, he's basically a wide receiver, and he's a talented wide receiver that plays tight end. So they have two really good options. They can make it work if they re-sign Cordero Patterson. Like, they have three good wide receiving options. I don't know that they're desperate to get a wide receiver. I know people want to fill the Calvin Ridley hole, but I don't think they're as bad off in that spot as people think they are. What teams could use, though, is there's a better tight end, in my opinion, that's available than a lot of these wide receivers, and that's Dalton Schultz. I could see any team that needs a receiving tight end or just receiving help in general could target Dalton Schultz.
So there's two spots that I would like him to go to for fantasy production and kind of interest of that offense based on him going there. The first one is my second choice, and that would be the Lions. Love to see him play with Goff. Love to see him play with Jamison Williams, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and Swift. Just give them another juggernaut passing option and kind of filling the TJ Hawkinson role that was left behind during the trade in the season. And then my number one spot for him would be with the Bengals. They're going to have a spot left with Hayden Hurst leaving, and to see Joe Burrow and Dalton Schultz kind of team up would be a that could be a juggernaut of an offense and make it even more of a juggernaut going forward. What do you think about those two spots?
I think those are two really good spots. I really like the Bengals spot, especially if they can't re-sign Higgins or they end up trading Higgins. They're going to need another receiving option next to Chase and Boyd if they re-sign Boyd, a longer deal. So I think he would be really good there, and he's definitely an upgrade over Hurst. I think, though, they might re-sign Hurst for pretty cheap. I think that won't happen as much as we would love that to happen. Two other good spots, though, if Dalton Schultz stays in the NFC East to kind of get revenge on the Cowboys at least twice this season for not paying him. The Commanders and the Giants are two really good spots for him. Commanders have not been able to get a reliable, healthy receiving tight end the past, I feel like, decade. And the Giants, as we've already discussed, desperately need any kind of receiving help that they can get. Does the NFC East sound likely to you?
Thomas with the Commanders, or he might be a complementary piece to Bellinger with the Giants. Because we do know Bellinger had a good first year with the Giants, just he had the eye socket injury, which made it a little bit more difficult to assess him this year, because when you have a broken eye socket, it's really going to screw up your game for a few weeks, even when you get back.
Yeah, if they had both of those tight ends, Bellinger and Schultz, definitely help with blocking for Barkley or making it interesting for Barkley to make some plays. But I think that's it. We really appreciate you guys watching. That does it for our first episode of the Never Too Early Fantasy Podcast. Thank you for listening. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. Please share the show. It really helps. We're just getting started out. We would really like you guys to spread the news, because we'd like to make this something other than just a fun hobby. So anything, if you guys feel like we're good or we have potential, please give us a shout and let us know.
Absolutely. And I look forward to discussing all these free agent signings next week with everybody, because we're going to have a whole bunch of roster moves going into next week. But you can find us on Twitter, TikTok, YouTube at N2EFantasy. Please check it out. Give us a follow on each one. And remember, it is never too early for fantasy football. Until next time, take care of yourselves. Never too early.
Thanks, everybody.